Am I good? Welcome. Thank you all for coming. My name is Senko, and I'm a resident here at Upaya, and you're here with us on a tender day in the midst of the winds of change here at Upaya. Ami Diller, Sensei Ami Diller, who was with us for 6 or 7 months as our resident teacher, her husband Mark, and our unofficial mascot, their dog Bingo, departed this morning. We have 2 dear residents who will be departing this week, and 2 more who are coming in. And we were blessed a week ago with the arrival of Alcio, Sensei Alcio Braz, who came to us from Brazil, and in this incredible way, just in a week, has seamlessly become this just warm, humble, and holding presence for our resident body. And also a dear and close friend to me. So I'm very excited to welcome him. I'm going to read your bio, the official bio as I understand it. Do you want me to read your birth year? Your bio starts with your birth year. Do you want me to read that?
Okay. The next month, so unfortunate, I won't be here to get gifts.
We'll mail you some. So Alcio was born in 1956 in Rio de Janeiro, is an MD and a psychiatrist, and has a master's in social anthropology. He works in palliative care in Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. Alcio began Zen practice in Japan in 1992. There's a lot of Japanese in here, Alcio. In 1992 with Bunkei Yamamoto Roshi. Practiced in the New York Zendo with Edo Shimano Roshi in 1993 and 94. Took vows with Ryotan Shokuda Roshi in Rio in 1995. Founded a Zen Sangha, also in 1995 in Rio, and became an authorized teacher in 2001. He had coordinated a Ninji temple in Rio since 2012. The same year, he became Roshi Jones' student at Upaya. He teaches contemplative care in Brazil and retired from Ninji's ordination in 2023. Congratulations. Though he remains the teacher there. And we are so honored to have Alcio in our midst. And thank you so much for being here. And we'll start with the first question.
Thank you. Your brother. Dear friends. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot about it. That's part of my training, forgetting things. Thank you, sir. Good evening. I'm so sorry. And I'd like to express my deep gratitude to Roshi Joe, who, I think I need the glasses, who offered me the gift of practicing here and now at this wonderful environment where I have been so kindly welcomed by this dear community. Thank you. And I'm not going to say names because if so, the whole Dharma talk would end with the list of people who work and give their lives here. But I can also, I would say, thank you, all dear practice companions, and may I be blessed with clarity and straightforwardness, so to honor your loving works. And also, I can see here Natalie Golder, which is an honor for me to have here, because last week she gave one of the most fresh or refreshing Dharma talks I have ever been able to listen to and feel it more than listen, because she was not giving a Dharma class, she was sharing with us her Dharma, her mind. It was wonderful. Although in Portuguese we have an expression that she said like this called the place for us to jump. So that was my feeling after on Thursday. I was like, oh my God, next week I'm going to be there. So after Natalie, what can I say? I should stay silent like Bimalakiti and just say, okay, I'm here. But Natalie, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And Bonnie, thank you for being here. She has the task of orienting my eyes for me not to strain around. Because I would love to look at each one here, but we have our friends there on our virtual Zendo. So she's going to make some gestures that are not part of the ritual, and I become very involved in what I'm saying. And also to our friends in the virtual Zendo, you can write her in our chat on YouTube, and she will read. And if there are questions or comments later, I hope I can honor time, and that there will be time for the people here to comment or ask anything. So I hope, but we are taught not to hope too much, so it's okay. And also, I want to apologize for my use of English. Natalie talked about English teachers. I hope there are no one here, but it's not my native language, and I wish I could speak to you in Portuguese, because Portuguese is my heart language. And it's not only a question of translation. I mean, it's not the same when you speak your language and when you speak another language, because the words may be translated like amor, love. But when I speak amor, I remember my mother, I remember my childhood. And I speak love, it's like I remember American movies. It's not the same for me. See, that's not like I'm criticizing, it's just the truth of the moment. I will never probably be or short practice now. Of course, you're not obliged to make it or to take it as something that you have to do, but it will be interesting, I suppose. I have a small bell here, and I will ring it one time to prompt us to close our eyes, and each one of us shall invite her or his ancestors to be here with us at this point of time and space. And doesn't matter whether they are alive or dead. I mean, everybody who is a kind of mentor is an ancestor for us. That's not necessarily a blood lineage. You know that because we recite our Buddhist lineage in this beautiful place in the liturgy. And it doesn't matter if you're considering them to be spirits or genetic memories or cultural imprints. I mean, you can be an atheist and you have cultural, you have in your culture all those ancestors and in your genetics. So it doesn't matter. But I would certainly invite us to recite to yourself, if you're in the Zendo, silently. If you're alone at home, please do it aloud. And you can recite all the lineage that you have. Oh, I have 2 minutes, so don't be too long. And after a short time, I'll ring the bell again for us to open our eyes. And one important thing is that if any emotion or reaction shows up when you visualize any of your ancestors, please do not analyze it, do not talk with yourself, just stay with that. Be the reaction it is. So don't choose the good ancestors, just let everything that comes be accepted here. And stay with it, and do not judge nor blame yourself nor the ancestor. And just go on. It will go on for 2 minutes, so don't worry. We won't have many emotional explosions, I suppose. And as I said, if you're not wanting to do it, it's okay. Just close your eyes and stay there with your breath and posture. Okay? So, may all beings, including our ancestors and ourselves, be pacified. Well, it's incredible how many people can be here at the same time. And there is a famous Zen story. I'm not going to tell you where it is because I don't really remember, although it's in the Shobogenzo. Dogen tells that story too, but it's about a master of sutras who had specialized in the Diamond Sutra. And so he heard about a renowned Zen master and wanted to challenge him. It seems that was a practice, to challenge masters and go there, make long travels, and then say, oh, I'm going to see if this guy really knows something. But then this guy walks, and he finally, and he's carrying a lot of paper rolls with this Diamond Sutra, which is a very important sutra in the Mahayana tradition. But then he arrives to a place where an old lady is making, I don't know, rice balls or rice dumplings. And then he's very hungry. And he said, oh, can I have some? And she says, oh, who are you? And he tells her, I'm specialized. Oh, okay. He tells his story, his curriculum, like Senko did for me so masterfully. And then she said, oh, yeah, I'm a student of Master Ta, so-and-so, but I will give you, you don't have to pay for the rice balls, but you just have to answer one question. With which mind are you going to eat those rice balls? With the mind of the past, the mind of the present, or the mind of the future? And then this guy, this famous master of the sutras, couldn't answer. You can imagine his own deception with himself. So he kept hungry. She didn't give him the rice balls. And then he burned the sutra. I don't advise you to do that with any book that you don't believe anymore. But the point is that he burned it, and he went to the master. But that's not the interest of the story for us. But the question is, so with which mind do you seek the way? And the mind, okay, that you call yours, your mind. But which one of those innumerable ones that we have invited into this Zen? You know, all of them are with us all the time. We can acknowledge that or not. We can like that or not, but they're always with us. Even if you think that we can begin from zero, like, oh, I'll make a different story from everyone in my family. Not possible. What can we do? You carry thousands, hundreds of thousands of years in your cells, in your culture, in each of the bodies here. We have body memories from this life, but we have body memories of many lives in our genome and also in our cultural genome. So, which mind is going to seek the way? Maybe some have already found the way, but I'm not sure. In my personal experience, I don't think so. I think we are having a lot of counsels inside us, but we're still working on it. And one thing that we may think is that in the beautiful liturgy that is practiced here at Upaya, we recite sometimes the female and the male Buddhist lineages, or the people who kept the transmission alive so that we could be here today practicing. But that's not the privilege of the Buddhist practice. We have lineages in our Afro-Brazilian religions too. They're not really recited, but we do rituals in which we become children and we become part of a clan. So today I'm using this as outside my clothing, because this is a sort of identity card that I am a son of Shango, who is the Orisha, the god of thunder. Not Thor, it's Shango. He's from the Yoruba pantheon. And we call it Afro-Brazilian religion. Some people say cult, which really offends me sometimes when people say cults for native religions, because it's like they were less than the official colonizer religion, but they are really religions. And more than that, that religion was really created in Brazil, because many of the people who came from Africa, they were sequestered there, but they were brought from different nations. So what happens is that when they were brought together, they had to do some kind of way to live together and to keep their religion. So they built a new religion in which all those gods and goddesses began to relate, because usually there would be one god for a village. And then you had to make Shango, like my father. He had to relate to Ogun, who was the god of iron in another place. And so they began building a rich mythology, very rich. We love Greek mythology, but there is also Yoruba and all the African mythologies. And they mixed with the indigenous peoples in Brazil. And so we began this beautiful religion. And so what's important is that, at least in Brazil, we can be Buddhists, we can practice candomblé, we can be Catholics. And I'm telling you that all of these practices have their cultural imprints. So when I talk with you, all these gods and goddesses and people, you can call them archetypes, are working. And I'm sure it works like that, like this with you, but some of us in the Northern Hemisphere have grown up without the notion of our lineages, spiritual lineages, and also our ancestry. It's part of the neoliberal thought that individuals make themselves by themselves and that they have no history. They should part from their family and they should like stand alone in the road and then make themselves successful. That's not the way it works in traditional, I don't like the word, but okay, in traditional cultures. And I'm gonna tell you a personal story, like a concrete example, because I think it's more useful if I use something concrete than if I stay here talking about the theory of this thing. Sometimes we try to learn nonviolent communication, for example, and this is good. This is really good. This shows an intention of doing less harm to ourselves and to others. I'm sorry if I'm not looking too much, but I had to look at our friends there. What will be the effect of this practice of nonviolence or nonviolent communication in spite of our good intentions if we don't acknowledge the violence we bring in our spiritual stories, in our cultural genome? I mean, good intentions are good, but they cannot undo thousands of years of blood spilling. And that's in us. I'll tell you two fragments, maybe, of my family history, so that can make maybe this point more understandable. I'm the second son of a family that was composed by a woman who came from the northeast of Brazil, like, for example, 2,000 miles from Rio de Janeiro. She lived in a place that has a climate much alike Santa Fe, but now it's more desertified, if I can use the word. At that time, there was droughts and floods, but now it's more desert-like. But anyway, it was a pretty rough environment. And she was born to a couple, my grandfather and grandmother. My grandmother was married when she was 13, and my grandfather was 50. It would be a crime today, probably. And this story, it's interesting how it came to me because it was given as something natural. In Rio de Janeiro, there was only my mother from the family and her youngest sister, who still lives there, the last one of that generation. She's 87 now. So when they talk about that, they say, oh, yeah, mom was 13 when she married our father because she was his third wife. The other two had died, so he tried a very young one, so that she wouldn't die. And yeah, man, that's true. And I can only think or suppose that she was sold by her family, because it's not usual that a 13-year-old girl falls in love with a 50-year-old guy in the almost desert. Like, oh my God, I'm in love with this guy. Probably not. Probably she was sold. It happened in this country too during the Great Depression. People sold small kids. And of course, once I asked my aunt about that, she said, oh, you have such crazy ideas. It was not like that. I mean, she wanted to marry him. And I don't think she was lying to me. I think that was the truth she could stand in her heart. And that's okay. That's the way it was for her. But the story doesn't end there, because this guy had indigenous origins, and my grandmother too. My grandmother was called Julia, and my grandfather, Lino. Both of them had indigenous origins, but mixed with Portuguese, African, that's common reason. But this guy who married the 13-year-old was the son of my great-grandmother, who was an indigenous woman, and my great-grandfather, who was a mixed African indigenous person. My great-grandfather was what we call in Portuguese, capitão do mato. He was someone who was in charge of hunting Indians, indigenous peoples in the forest, so that they could be enslaved or killed. And so he was like that. It's strange that an African indigenous guy is dead, but that was common because people used to put someone as a top hierarchy, and then he would pursue his similars. And that was the way it was. So he hunted my grandmother with dogs and things like that. So he raped her, but then he fell in love and they married. And so my grandfather was born. So you see, when this guy marries a 13-year-old girl, it's not by chance. That's the story that is going. And this story, I was only able to understand or makes any sense of it when I was like 40 or 45 years old, because my mother wouldn't talk about that. And my aunt just talked because I pressed her. Not very Buddhist thing to do, but it was important for me as not only as a person, but as an anthropologist to understand this story, you see. But this is to show you that there is a lot of blood, violence, rape, and just a question, should I hate my grandfather? And with whom should I identify? With my grandmother or with my grandfather? Or do I have to choose sides? Do I have to say I don't have anything to do with that? And this kind of thing is not in the past, really, because it keeps happening in Brazil in different ways. It's not the same. But one thing that we learned, I was in public school, and they told us that the indigenous peoples had been extinct. That was funny, because you can see by my color that I was not dead then. I just know that I'm not dead now. But the thing is that people taught us on the class that was majorly composed of Black and brown people, that the indigenous peoples had been extinguished, and the Black were brought from Africa, and the Portuguese had given us the gift of Christianity and good behavior. So it was interesting because it took me many years to understand that all those brown people on the streets are like me, indigenous descendants. So it's kind of crazy. Can you imagine a history teacher telling you that and you believing because it's a teacher, you are like 9 years old? It's okay. But the interesting is that idea of extinction, because it's still when you say originary peoples or first peoples, it seems that people are situated in the past. I mean, you are only indigenous if you are naked. In Brazil, many indigenous nations went about naked. So if you're naked and you live in the middle of the forest, it's okay. You're maybe the remnant of some indigenous nation. But if you are a doctor and you are dressed and you can speak English, then you are not an Indian. You are just a white person. In Brazil, that's the way it works. I mean, it's not really strictly the color code. It's also the symbolic status code. So it took me some time to understand that I was not white. And I only discovered that the first time I came to Santa Fe. Because I can tell you that because it was 2012. And then maybe because of, I don't know, 9/11, I don't know why, but I arrived at the airport and I was mistreated from the beginning to the end. And then someday I was walking in downtown Santa Fe and the guy passed by a car, very blonde guy, and he began speaking with me in Spanish, asking some directions. No problem, I love Spanish. It's not the thing. But I understood that I was being identified as someone who was not white because I couldn't possibly speak English. And I answered in English to him, I don't speak Spanish. So I got a little bit shocked. And I speak Portuguese. Do you speak Portuguese? He said, no. So, okay, you can speak English. So, but that was really the first time I perceived that I was not white. You see, it's interesting because it takes time for things to settle in us. And so I think my father's history is like a Portuguese boy, but he was the son of immigrants. And when they arrived in Rio, my grandfather just abandoned my grandmother and went to São Paulo. And so my grandmother was a single mother and became a worker in a cloth factory. It was interesting because my grandfather was escaping in 1910 from the Portuguese Republican Revolution that deposed the monarchy. And my grandfather was on the wrong side. It's funny because I think my family is always on the wrong side. Because my father, in 1964, at the time of the military coup d'etat that ousted the democratic government, my father was in the worker union side. So he was arrested for a year. And he was lucky that he came back alive. But then I asked Father, Dad, are we always in the wrong side? Because you told me that Granddad was fleeing Portugal. Because of that, now you were arrested for a year. So maybe we should choose other sides. But anyway, so what this means in this story is that when I was an adolescent, I was taught to suppress anger because I should not be an angry person. As someone who was a social untouchable because my father had been arrested, I should not be a violent person. I should be a very peaceful person. And it took me years of therapy and Zen practice to understand better how could I deal with all that. So I learned to suppress anger. And so I understand now that my Zen practice has to do with all those ancestors making peace with themselves. And I've been a real peacemaker in the sense that I can make peace in my heart and peace and be a peaceful center for anyone who comes to me in that sense. It's not that I don't feel angry. On the contrary, it's not by chance that I'm a son of Shango, which is the god of thunder, but is the god of anger. Of course, Shango has some nice aspect of his anger because usually he's not angry like, I woke up angry today. No, usually he's angry because of injustice or something that is oppression, and he gets angry and he has a double axe and he cuts heads. But most of the times he repents of cutting heads. And so, be it a coincidence, I don't believe in coincidence or not, I'm a son of Shango, so my anger can be of this kind. I would like to kill people sometimes. Never did, don't worry. But the thing is that I had to learn to acknowledge this feeling and learn how to work with that. That's not the objective today. I'm just saying that we have to acknowledge our ancestry, understand all these conflicts that are part of us, and not only part of our personal, individual narrative of the last 30, 20 years, but the part of thousands of years of violence. So these thousands of years of violence won't be erased just because we want, or just because we became good Zen practitioners or good patients, or things like that. So I suppose we have 10 more minutes, and I would not like to pass that. I only read a small paragraph, and also a part. I see that people like here when you read something of a poet or an author, so I'm going to do that. I'm a good learner. So anger management, this is not it. Anger management is not only a part of our practice, it is also a necessary part of healing our communities and societies so that we stop cultivating the violence and retribution seeking minds and can cultivate the loving care seeking minds. That's the way I call the way seeking mind. It's the loving care seeking mind. Loving care of ourselves, loving care of this world, be it in our small communities or in the larger ones. And one fragment of a very famous Brazilian writer, Clarice Lispector, who is really famous in Brazil. And I had the joy of finding two of her books yesterday in the Collected Works bookstore in Santa Fe. I was I went to that bookstore to have a chai and just sit there. And I thought, wow, Clarice Lispector. For us, she's an idol. And she was born in Hungary, but she lived since childhood in Brazil, and she's one of the best Brazilian writers. And there's just a small line. Life has made me belong from time to time, as if to give me the measure of what I lost by not belonging. And then I realized to belong is to live. Okay. Thank you very much. So I think we're 6:22. It's okay to have some comments. I would like to break the protocol up again and ask my friend Marinella, who is here, to make a comment, because Marinella, I met her as a childhood friend from lunchtime. And she's a teacher in Southwestern University, and she's a person who works many of those things that I've been talking here. So I would ask you if I'm not abusing of saying some kind of thing. Thank you.
My heart is really pounding here since I sat. And as I heard you tell all these stories, the heart kept beating harder and harder. I mean, everything that you said resonates so much with the work that I've been doing for the last 20-something years. And I think it's so important to share these misalignments that are actually portals of opportunities for us to find the path, the true path. And I'm fascinated that you are intertwining anger here as one of the portals. But I have a question for you. I wonder if you can address how all these lines, family lines that were crossed or that crisscrossed, informed perhaps your decision to become a psychiatrist. I don't want to, wow, that was a very directed question.
No problem.
It was a leading one, right?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Well, you asked
If
me.
you're prepared for an hour more of talking, Roshi John always says that you have to speak a little less. But a little. I had a friend in Switzerland. I went there once for give a talk, and then I told her, if I speak too much, just make that sign to me from, and I'll understand. But anyway, I think you're right about this intercultural crossing, because one of my first memories is sitting on the lap of my father when my father was a priest in the Afro-Brazilian religion. So it's funny because he was a Portuguese guy. He became a priest in the Afro-Brazilian religion. My mother was from indigenous extraction and became Catholic. So it's Brazil. And he would sit, usually when we would go to some rituals, she would go too, she loved it. But sometimes he would, like, we call it in Portuguese, incorporar, which can be translated as embodying. He was embodying some kind of Indian shaman called Jaquacanã. And when the Jaquacanã came, he became a very gentle and kind man. My father was not kind. He was born and raised in the harbor of Rio de Janeiro. You can imagine that he was not the sort of gentle, kind boy. But when he was incorporated with Jaquacanã, he was just like an old Indian wise man. And he would pick me from the ground, I remember that, put me on his lap, and would call people, and he would listen to them and their problems, and he would work as a psychiatrist. I would say an indigenous psychiatrist. So I think you're right, because that memory kept in my heart. And so it was funny because during high school, I was not really thinking about becoming a doctor, but suddenly when in Brazil, we have examinations like at the end of high school, like in Europe. So you have to do those to go to a university. We don't have college. So I entered medical school when I was 17. And so my first vision was a lot of bodies and anatomic thing. So I was presented to that, but not to dying. That's another whole story. But then I became a doctor and I understood. And of course, at first I wanted to be a surgeon because surgeons are heroes. And then during medical school, I understood that some people need people and not heroes. And then it's not a critic to surgeons because surgeons really save lives. But some people just need someone to sit by and do that. I was one thing that was part of it. I was afraid of hurting people as a surgeon because I was afraid of what I could do with a blade. Yeah, you see, anger can be tricky. I see. So I understood that as a psychiatrist, I would be less of a risk. That's not really true, but because I believe, what can I do? But it's only an example. So there are a lot of stories that can. And my thesis in anthropology was just about that vocation, what you call vocation, how are you called to something? And I talk about those. So thank you very much for your presence and for your question. Should be here for the Grace program. I'm very happy that you're here. Thank you. Do we have anything, Bonnie?
Nothing on chat.
So it's 6:28. Anybody else wants to? Mike, your last words. No, not last words. Mike is in transition to get out of Upaya today. So we had a week of being together that has been a great week.
Yeah, I wanted to ask this question in general, but then when you said it's 6:28, I'm like, we don't have time for this answer.
Just speak louder because you know I have a hearing.
Yeah, so the question, let's see if we can get it succinct, so we're on time. So the question is essentially, what are some of your own methods or your own practices for transmuting anger? You know, what's something more practical with that? I also deal with anger, and it's a beautiful energy when transmuted. So I'm curious
Okay.
what that looks like.
Good question. Unfortunately, but I'll try, like Roshi said, go to essence. And one thing is to acknowledge the feeling. The first thing, just acknowledge it, not begin a long narrative about it. Oh, I'm angry because our habit is to blame someone. It can be someone else, or we can blame ourselves. So both things don't work, really. I mean, we've been doing that, all of us, since we were young. And if it helped, we would not be here. So it's something interesting. It doesn't work, but we keep doing it. And that's very human. Yeah, that's human. We keep doing things that don't work. Like next time will be different. But anyway, so my suggestion, very simply, would be just stay quiet. Have you ever thought, why do we sit quietly? To the wall or look into the center of the zendo, you just avoid doing anything physically. Your mind may be exploding, but you're not moving. So you have this like safety of acknowledging your feelings and not have to act or react, to be more exact on them. So you can learn to be with them. Of course, I'm talking about a Zen practice that is to be with something just quietly, breathing with it, and not analyzing it. I'm a specialist in psychoanalysis. So for me, it's rather difficult sometimes to do this kind of thing, just sit with the feeling and not be beginning a whole history. It's not that it's not important, but we have to know the difference. We have to, if we are practicing, we should acknowledge the feeling, breathe with it, don't do anything. And use the first thing that Bernie Glassman Roshi said. You don't know really why you're in. You may think you know, but you don't know really. So please just live with it for a while. Then you sit, and then if you think that it's too unbearable, look for some mentor or guidance. Can be a teacher if you are in a Zen center. But sometimes you need real therapy. Westerners need a lot of therapy. Yeah, I'm part of it. So I'm in it too. And unfortunately, many people, not different, but many people in the beginning of Zen, like 30, 40 years ago, they thought that Zen was a substitute for therapy. And it led to many very unhappy endings. Because people, if it was that easy to deal with neurosis and psychosis, what would be the problem? Okay, I would be unemployed. But it's not because of that I'm saying. That's because it's really difficult. And there is a very subtle thing that is to honor what you're feeling, to honor your history, to understand and honor your ancestry, but to not cultivate victimization is different, but it can be tricky. Because, and it can give way to hate when you are, for example, from some, like us, indigenous origins, then you can look at people who are of a white situation and think, oh, those people are bad. Those people make my life terrible. Or Jair Bolsonaro, our last president, he was really terrible. And the worst thing he made was to make us hate him, because we became haters. So we forgot our basic loving kindness nature. That's not to say that he was a good guy. We should. I mean, people can be forgiven, but their actions they have to answer. There has to be responsibility. But to make someone be responsible does not mean to blame him for being a bad person. Usually it's interesting. We must work with the people we don't like. You see, if I met my grandfather and knew that he had raped my grandmother at that time, and I was not his descendant, probably I think he was a monster. And probably I would like to see him in jail or killed, and I would not be here. So it's very complicated, really. And there is no easy answer, but I think you, Mike, are in the way. You have the way seeking mind. Thank you.
One quick question.
Okay, just speak. I'll
just tell you. So one of our local Sangha members is wondering if you've written or published anything on making peace with your ancestors.
It's about, if you understood, you're asking, she's asking if I wrote.
If you've written anything on this.
Yeah, I wrote a book that is being published when I go back to Brazil. It's now in the graphic. It's called, in Portuguese, O Encontro, the encounter. But it's in Portuguese. So if you don't read Portuguese, I suppose it will be difficult. Although it's not impossible to try to learn Portuguese. But no. If you speak Spanish, for example, many people here have some notion of Spanish in the United States. And if you speak Spanish, it's not so difficult to read Portuguese. To speak is a bit different, but to read Portuguese, if you know Spanish or Italian, for example, cannot be so difficult, and it will be an exercise. I'm really touched by the idea that someone might read my book in Portuguese. I gave Roshi my 2 previous books in Portuguese for her to keep at Ipaya's library. So if you want to try, give a try to Portuguese, it's a beautiful language. And it's interesting to say it's a beautiful language because Portuguese is the language of the colonizer. But you see, it's this contradiction that makes us alive because I never learned the language of my ancestors in Brazil. So what can I do? And I think Portuguese is a beautiful language, although the things the Portuguese did in Brazil are not beautiful. But you have to remember that Portugal was a place of many wars during the Middle Ages and the Antiquity. So there were Celtics, Romans, Visigoths, Moors, a lot of blood being spilled. So when these people invaded Brazil, they just knew violence. So there's no way to say, oh, the indigenous peoples were all good. It's not true. Our peoples killed themselves. So it's not so easy to choose sides and say, oh, these guys are bad, these guys are good. Life. Please send.
Thank you. Nugget. Thank you so much, Alcio. And that image you gave of being a kind of vessel of holding the complicated ancestral histories and the internal peacemaking and deeply resonated with me. Really appreciate that. A couple announcements before we end. The first is that we will be hosting the Grace program here, beginning officially Friday afternoon. And so those local Sangha members who come and sit with us, you are welcome to come and sit. We will still be sitting at 7 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. The Zendo will be a little bit more full. We will not be doing liturgy in the morning. But we will be doing our 25 minutes of sitting, 10 minutes of probably stretching in place or doing some walking in the sunroom, 25 minutes of sitting. Next week's Dharma Talk is with Ben Connolly and it will be online. So you're welcome to come sit with us in Zendo. We will be watching TV instead of Alcio. Second to last, you are all invited to join us for dinner. So if you'd like to have dinner with us, as soon as you leave, you can take a left and head to the front door of Upaya to River House, enter there, and we'll gather around the table for the meal prayer. And the last is a request on behalf of Alcio and his generosity and everything that he has shared with us, that you practice Dhamma Paramita and give what you can on the way out the door. I will be holding the begging bowl, and this is a beautiful practice that we have, the practice of generosity and the practice of giving what we can to honor Alcio and his work in the world. And if you would now, thanks to Sensei Kodo, if you would like to donate using a mobile device, we have QR codes for various Venmo and other online pay applications, and they're posted right on the bulletin board outside of Zendo. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Alcio, and we'll close with the 4 vows.
Thank you for reminding me. Yo